Hi everyone, my name is Kathy. My husband, my mom, and I just flew halfway across the world to be with you all here today. So I know I'm the last to go, but I do hope that you still listen to and enjoy my presentation. So the title of my thesis is Bridging Ideas of Self: What the Filipino Notion of Kapwa Can Contribute to Yogic Understanding. So before I get all academic on you all, this is just a photo of me at 7 years old. I'm playing by the beach in my home country in the Philippines. And I wanted to start off this way because really the sorry. So because really the past 3 years in this MA journey has been one of reflection and contemplation on who I am. My yoga education and my practice have really made me think about my history and my ancestors, my culture and my heritage, my past and my future. I am from Southeast Asia. I was raised Catholic as an effect of my ancestors being colonized by Spain. I was raised bilingual, so I can speak both English and Tagalog as a result of my ancestors being colonized by North America. And in my country, where the gap between the rich and the poor is very, very vast, being able to fly across the Pacific Ocean and just philosophize with you, it's a vast privilege. And this made me contemplate on who I am, on my identity. To my mom, I'm her youngest daughter. To my husband, I'm the love of his life. To my loved ones watching on Zoom, hi, Dad. And all my friends, I am just another loved one presenting her thesis. And to most people, I'm an Asian woman with dark hair and brown skin. So who am I really? And so it's only fitting that I've started to ask myself these questions because yoga, after all, is a path to self realization. So most of us here think that yoga is an exercise, yoga is about stretching. But truly, and as all my classmates and fellow graduates of the program here know, that yoga is a path to self knowledge, self mastery, self realization. And so I started to ask myself the question: what are the different ways in which we can understand the self? This made me start digging deep into indigenous knowledge. So, indigenous knowledge is defined as a body or a system of knowledge that provides ways of knowing about meanings, purposes, and values of self, family, community, and land. I'll illustrate it a little bit for you. Indigenous knowledge is the way a Filipino fisherman might know that the tilapia fish holds its offspring in its mouth. Indigenous knowledge is the way a Filipino farmer would know exactly when the monsoon rains would hit. Indigenous knowledge is the way any Filipino from my country would know that when you walk in the woods, you have to say the phrase tabi tabi po as a gesture of respect to all the spirits that live in the woods. And so I started thinking about how indigenous knowledge is relevant in yoga today. And so I decided to look into my own worldview and my own culture, which is Filipino philosophy. So most people don't really know that this exists, so I'm happy to share this with you today. So Filipino philosophy is humanist. It's defined as a relationship-oriented virtue ethics. The way a Filipino sees the world is based on their relationships with others, as well as with nature, as well as with ancestors. So classical thinkers include Filipino ilustrados like Jose Rizal and Apolinario Mabini. So these were the intellectuals who were crucial in our freedom from Spain. Contemporary thinkers include scholars like Leonardo Mercado, Virgilio Enriquez, and Father Jaime Bulatao. I cited all of these thinkers in my thesis as well. And it's a result of Southeast Asian animism and Western Catholic tradition. So again, for those of you who don't know, animism is a kind of worldview where people inscribe souls into inanimate objects or in nature. So in the Philippines, everything has a soul, from the trees to the ocean, even the sky, everything has a spirit. However, again, as I mentioned earlier, we were also colonized first by Spain for 300 years. We were also colonized by the US for 40 years. And so Christianity and Catholic tradition in general really plays a big influence in the way that we think and in the way that we behave. The central concept of my thesis is the Filipino concept of Kapwa. So I'm going to give a little bit of a Tagalog lesson. Tagalog is a language where, again, relationships play a big role. And so the prefix ka appears in a lot of our words. So ka denotes a person or a thing with whom the place, object, quality, or situation expressed by the root is shared. In other words, it's a prefix that describes relationship and also reciprocity. So here are a few words as an example. So let's take the word kalaban, for example. So the word laban in Tagalog, it can refer to war, it can refer to a fight. And so put together, kalaban, it refers to your enemy. And it should be understood that when you say one is your kalaban, he is your enemy and you are his enemy as well. The relationship is shared. So the relationship is mutual, yeah. Another word that we use every day in the Philippines is the word kaibigan. So let's break it down a little. In the Philippines, the word ibig means deep intimacy. So the word kaibigan is actually someone who you share a deep intimacy with. Interestingly enough, it's the word we use for friend. So when we make friends with someone, when we consider someone our friends, we don't do so loosely. We share a connection, a very deep connection with someone, and that constitutes friendship. So this leads me to my central concept, which is kapwa. So the word loosely means one's neighbor or one's community member. But if you look at the root word, which is puang, puang means space. So someone who is your kapwa is someone who literally shares space with you, someone who is within your space right now. So right now, you're all in this space with me. You are all my kapwa. Everyone on Zoom in that virtual space is also here with me. So kapwa is someone that you are together with. But interestingly, in Filipino philosophy, if we dive more deeply, kapwa is the shared self. So in Western thought, most people think that the self is the ego, the self is the individual. But in Filipino culture, we have no such thing. There is no such thing as the individual self. The self is shared. The self is the unity of one with the other. So this is a beautiful painting by one of our national artists, Fernando Amorsolo. He depicts here the image of a practice that was long practice before. It's not really practice anymore. It's called bayanihan. And it's the actual lifting of your neighbor's home, moving your neighbor's home from one location to the next. And so this sense of helping others because you see yourself in them is something that is very significant in being Filipino. Another central concept in my thesis is the concept of loob. So the word loob typically refers to the inside of things, like the inside of a jar, the inside of a box, the inside of a closet. However, in Filipino philosophy, it goes much deeper. So loob actually refers to one's inner realm, one's inner world. Now, I just said that there is no self, no egocentric self in yoga. So how can there be an inner realm? Well, in Filipino philosophy, loob cannot exist without kapwa. Loob cannot thrive without kapwa. Loob needs kapwa. In Filipino culture, people are often judged or thought of by their relationships with others. So we really judge someone if they're disrespectful to their elders. We really judge someone if they treat someone poorly. And we see this as a reflection of who they are inside. So as a yoga teacher and as a yoga scholar, I started asking myself, is Kapwa compatible with yogic ideas of the self? And so for the next few slides, I'm going to investigate on whether Kapwa is actually compatible with different philosophical systems in yoga, such as Samkhya, Patanjali Yoga, which were discussed already by my classmates earlier, as well as Buddhism and Jainism, and of course, Vedanta. So let's start with Samkhya. So as Laura talked about earlier at the very start of this session, Samkhya is a dualist philosophy, meaning that there are two very significant principles that underscore the entire system. So first, there is Prakriti, which refers to the entirety of creation, from the stars and the sky to the ocean and the trees. Prakriti is everything that encompasses reality. Even our own thoughts and our emotions are Prakriti. Now, Purusha is said to be the true self. Purusha is consciousness. It is the knower of the world. However, sometimes Prakriti and Purusha get entangled. We start thinking that we are our thoughts. We start thinking that we are our emotions. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated. This is where suffering arises. And so Samkhya asks us to separate the two, to be able to see two as really distinct. But it doesn't really tell us how, right? But yoga does. Yoga tells us, and yoga gives us these certain steps. And it was also discussed by Alice earlier, this eightfold path in order to come into this state of self-realization. So here we can see a clear divergence. Samkhya asks us to separate, but Filipino philosophy asks us to unite. Samkhya tells you you aren't your identity as a teacher, as a daughter, as a wife. But Filipino philosophy tells us that our relationships with others are so important. So yeah, we see a clear divergence. However, Kapwa is actually similar to yoga because it is an embodied experience. It's realized through practice. It's realized through being with others, through practicing the yamas and niyamas or ethical values that help us realize who we truly are. But Buddhism says no, no, there is no self. So to the Buddhist, there is no self. To be able to even conceive of a self actually causes suffering. And the doctrine of momentariness states that everything in reality is composed of several instants that appear and disappear and then move on towards the next. And so the rejection of the self, I argue, is actually the beginning of Kapwa. It's actually very compatible with it. Kapwa rejects any thought of the individual self. And I really wanted to show one of my favorite lines that I also quoted in my thesis. This is by a Zen philosopher, Shizu Teruweda, who writes, "The self is never there, but always in process of transformation, always fitted to its circumstances, and likewise always proceeding from out of itself, blooming in the flowers of the selfless self." So if we are always beginning, ending, and transforming together, how am I different from the person in front of me or next to me? And so, how am I different from the sky above or different from the ocean below? So now let's look at Jainism. Actually, the Jains don't really agree with the Buddhists. In fact, the Jains might actually agree with the Samkhyans to the extent that the self is consciousness. However, in Jainism, a clear distinction is that the self, the soul, is shrouded by karma. So, for all my classmates in Jainism, we might remember that karma in Jainism is like a really sticky substance that clings to the soul. And part of embodied life is being able to wear off this karma little by little through the practice of the five Jain vows, one of which we know in popular yoga as ahimsa. And I argue that ahimsa is actually very similar to a Filipino virtue that we have called kagandahang loob. Kagandahang loob can be translated into English as the beauty of will, and it refers to acts or gestures that we do out of the goodness of our heart and to reduce harm in the world. So helping a neighbor cross a flood would be an act of kagandahang loob. Rescuing a kitten from the rain would be an act of kagandahang loob. So to practice kagandahang loob, we must also practice ahimsa as well. And so we come into Vedanta and the discussion of the Atman. So in Vedanta, the Atman is usually the word used to refer to the self or the soul. But for Vedantins, this does not exactly mean that they believe in an I-centric self. In fact, Atman is Brahman. So the self is the infinite. The self is ultimate reality. So I'd like to expound on this through the metaphor of an atom. The same atom that is present in a singular cell in our body is also the same atom that you might find in a galaxy far, far away. So, although both are different, although they are different in the same of constitution, this also shows that there is a fundamental essence present in everything and everyone. I know this example has a bit of limitations, but it still describes how the infinite may also be present in the individual. I also want to point out that Filipino philosophy actually disagrees a lot with classical Vedanta, which actually asks you to turn away from the world. Filipino philosophy might be more compatible with the Neo-Vedanta popularized by the likes of Paramahansa Yogananda, as well as Vivekananda, in which the self is the world and there is harmony with the self and the universe. And so in Filipino culture, we also have the concept of pakikipagkapwa-tao, which means to see oneself and others. And I'd like to think that to be able to see oneself and others, to be able to harmonize with everyone, is also a form of something that we know in yoga as liberation while living. And so, what do we learn from all of this? So, first, we learn that the self is shrouded. And in these different traditions, they're all talking about different things, whether it's by misidentification, whether it's by illusion, by karma, or by ignorance. However, the self can be realized. So, even if it's concealed, we also know that the self can be realized through knowledge, through practice, through adherence to the Eightfold Path in Buddhism, or the five great vows in Jainism. We also know and we also learn that the search for the self is also the search for the truth. Maybe the question is not really who am I or who are we, but rather what are we here for and what is the meaning of this existence. Finally, Kapwa is more than just about one's relationships with others. It is about an authentic encountering of the world. And so selfhood can be realized or rejected when we encounter, when we witness the world. So yeah, Buddhism and classical Vedanta, they may reject the world, but their precepts and teachings are still informed by the world we live in. So, so what? As yoga scholars and practitioners, can we make space for all of this? So, this is a call to include indigenous philosophy and popular yoga. This does not mean disregarding the South Asian paradigm, not at all. This simply means including different perspectives in yoga today. As it stands, Southeast Asian teachers like me aren't given a big enough platform to share their ideas. We have very little international mobility to be able to stand in front of a crowd like this and talk about what I'm talking about right now. If we include indigenous concepts like Kapwa and Loob, we can reshape the landscape of yoga today. We create more accessibility and more inclusivity in yoga. And so, to all those watching and listening at home and in here, this is a call to create accessible platforms for philosophy, to be able to teach and share philosophy in a way that everybody understands. Anyone who has practiced yoga may have experienced a sense of calm and grounding, but cannot seem to answer why. It is not just science, it is also indigenous knowledge. And so, by creating accessible spaces to share knowledge and encourage creativity, we can really change yoga. We can really change the world. Yoga teachers, we can also improve how philosophy is taught. We can improve our programs and teacher trainings. We can give space for indigenous knowledge. We can give voices to Asian teachers, as well as be able to deepen our understanding of what self realization, self knowledge, self mastery, what all of these really are. And I think in this world today where AI is really dominating the way that we think, the way that we share, the way that we create, that it is a good reminder that all of these philosophical systems that were invented a long, long time ago and are still transforming now, these are all what make us human. And so to end my presentation, I'd like to end with a Filipino phrase, a Tagalog phrase, makipagkapwa-tao tayo, which means let us see each other in ourselves, let us see each other in the world. Maraming salamat po, or thank you very much.